really important was, why are we not seeing more characters with disabilities? I mean, I'd like to see more like creative types with disabilities actually out there in the mainstream, but why are we not even seeing at least characters? And so part of it was, when I'm out doing these things and doing the conventions and talking to people, I started asking, so why are you not doing that? And so so the result of that is what you're going to hear today. If you were in the earlier panel with me and Ari, you'll know I like to do a lot of talking back and forth with people. So I actually am one of those people who loves, if you have a question, go ahead and speak out. That's fantastic. I love that, and then I can explain more as we go. Please don't raise your hand. I won't see it. So I'm assuming we're all adults, so we know better than to talk over one another. So if that sounds good, let's go ahead and begin. So we have From the Field. It's an examination of responses from mainstream writers, artists, and producers on disability. And the first thing I have up there is the actual mission of this convention, which is one of the things I love about it, is it's much more broad, and it talks about the ideas and the aspects of popular culture. And a lot of times when we think about disability, you're worried about getting a job, you're worried about housing, you're worried about accommodations. And a lot of times what you hear back from the general public is, why should you be worrying about something like popular culture or what's on television? And one of the things we forget is how much it shapes our views, but also the general public's views. And when it comes to, let me be frank, before I worked for the Department of Labor, I was a lobbyist. And when it comes to influencing Congress and the laws, there are three things you can have. One is a whole lot of people supporting an issue. If you have a lot of people voting on something, they're going to pay attention. Two is a whole lot of money to put into something. And the third is a whole lot of media attention. If it's hot in the news, they're going to think it's a hot issue. And so the idea of it impacting popular culture is going to impact them too. And so part of the things what we're going to get is going to be that change. So big fan. So I figured one of the first places to start, and the easiest would be my own work. So yes, it's a little bit vain, but actually I think there's some interesting numbers here. So about a year ago, a friend and I put together an anthology, and we called it Trust and Treachery, Tales of Power, Intrigue, and Violence. It's a great cover, isn't it? Found a fabulous guy on DeviantArt who did that for us. And one of the things was, we wanted to have a collection of stories. Mystery, science fiction, fantasy, just a wide plethora. But one of the things we specifically wanted was diversity. Diversity in our creators and diversity in our characters. And so when we put out the call for submissions, I went to all the different online forums that I could find. I sent it out to friends in the disability community to send out to their networks. I sent it out to the Black Science Fiction Writers Society, the UK Writing Society. So basically the idea is we could get a broad number of groups. I sent it out to women's groups. And so I figured we're doing a pretty good job. We're putting out this strong push to get diversity in there. Because when you look at the anthologies that come out, particularly in speculative fiction, science fiction, anything like that, you'll see it's a whole bunch of usually men with maybe one woman in there. And if you look at the demographics, they tend to all be very, very white. And I can hear people go, well, what's really wrong with that? And it's the same reason we push for disability and everything. And it's a great example. If you have a table and you've got all these, and let's say you've got 5 people sitting around the table, and you want them to solve a problem for you. If they're all the same kind of background, the same race, same ethnicity, same education, they're going to come up with some ideas. But if you have people from different races, backgrounds, countries, languages, disabilities, you're going to get a broader array of ideas. So when you work on that theory, you're going to have better ideas the more diversity you have. So I just want to reinforce that. So one of the things this is, Kate Hart is a writer, and one of the things she did in 2010 is she looked at the covers of young adult books, and she started saying, okay, so what is on these covers? What's kind of the expression? And it was seeing this, it kind of made me worry a lot about it, and why we did our huge push about what we saw on the covers. And you can see when you're talking about the numbers of white girls on there versus other ethnicities, boys, things like that, what was the cover? And you see this huge disparity. And so it's like, oh, what can we do to make sure that we address that? And so we went from there. And so this is what came from ours. We had 450 submissions, and this is actually a partial breakdown. I started looking at the main characters. What did we get, and what were some of the different diversities? So when you look at it, we had by far more main characters that were men. And if you look at the little itty bitty, I think it's blue next to it, is women. I think it's maybe 1/3 of the characters were women. People of color, and that number looks pretty low. I said for 450 submissions, I'd say we had maybe a little over a dozen and a half characters of color. Unknown is where, from the writing itself, I could not tell either gender or race or anything like that. It was very unclear. We actually had a couple of blue aliens as well, so I was kind of like, they went into that category. Disability and LGBT. Now, when I talked about an LGBT, I had one main character who was LGBT. But for disability, it's like, you can see it's a tiny little light blue thing that looks pretty small next to the rest. I can actually tell you the exact number of stories we got that had characters with disabilities. So out of 450 submissions, five stories had characters with disabilities. And this is after I put out a call for submissions through various networks for writers with disabilities, and also and even people without disabilities to write characters. 5. And so you can actually look at, I had to put it in there, and I'm like,
oh my God.
What was in there? I'm like, so that's how many. It was that small, and it was disappointing to see that. And the thing is, I know, at least from personal relationships with a couple of the other people who submitted, that the creators had disabilities. They chose not to write characters with disabilities, or have any as sidekicks or in the background. And that's the other thing. Those 5 were 5 main characters. No other stories had a character with a disability in the background or as a sidekick, side character. Nothing. So it was a little disheartening. So, and then I decided, well, okay, this is not meaningful pie, but it's tasty. I thought, of those 5, how did they break down? We had 1 blind character, we had 2 mentally ill characters, we had 1 deaf character, and 1 autistic character. So, wow, that's pretty much it. And actually, of those 5, and this is the part that was a little distressing, 4 of the characters were either murdered or murderers. So I'm like, okay. So that's where people with disabilities end up, and that's, from my experience, about what I got from the field, pushing to find disability. I'd like to think it's better, but I also know from other anthologists and editors who put stuff out who haven't done the big push for diversity, their numbers are even less, which is really sad. So, so one of the things to kind of, after that, I don't want to call it a failure, it was one of those surprises. I'm like, all right, what can I do as an individual, and what are things that we can do actually as a community? And one of the easiest things was talk to people we know. I'm a writer, I work in science fiction. I actually have a writing group that I meet with on a pretty regular basis. And so I actually sat down and had a discussion with them about, all right, you guys, this sucks, actually. Let's be frank, that's what it is. This is terrible. If people with disabilities make up almost 20% of the population, why are we not seeing them in, not necessarily 20% of the stories, but at least more than 5 out of 450. So, and so what was great is, and I will get later to some of the angst that went before that, but at the end of the discussion, we had one of the writers picked it up, and she says, you know what, we should put it out there, we should ask other writers to do it. And so she created a challenge. And so she goes, I want you, all you authors out there, to put a disabled character in your story. And I'll be honest, and I'll warn you guys here, she doesn't always use the best language, and I'll be honest, I may not always use the best language, so please feel free to correct me on poor word choice. I think it's perfectly fair. So, and so she says, you know, look at your story, see if you can turn a character into a disabled character. And I'm like, I don't know if that works for people, but she's like, let's just do it. Let's push people to do it. And she wanted them to interact with their main characters. They wanted to have dialogue. She wanted to have them be real people. And for those of you who sat in on the earlier panel about positive elements in characters with disabilities, one of the key ones that Ari and I both stressed over and over is they're people. They should have other aspects about them that are important. And the third was, as part of her challenge, was mention that disability in 3 ways. And I actually, for somebody who doesn't have a disability, who had just heard about it after a couple of weeks of arguing with the group, I thought this was really good that she gave that. And then this is the example that she gave. Let me see if I can remember it off my head. So you have a woman with a walker, so it's a description, and she's working her way in the hallway of her building. The main character works with her, and they end up having a conversation about another weirdo in their office. So, yeah, obviously I don't remember, I'm reading this wrong, but so there's another example. And then she talks about the sound the walker makes, so that's like also in there, and the idea of the guy at the door holding it open. So I'm like, that's not a bad way. It was written in, it wasn't a big deal, it was part of the story, and she kept going. So, now, that was up for, I think, 2 months.
Weirdo is a great name for a superhero.
Oh, weirdo.
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 Yeah.
Oh, so.
Hi, Dave, can I
Yeah,
ask a
so
question?
speak up.
I guess I'm curious, maybe you're going to address this, but I guess, could you go back to the requirements?
Wait.
Yes.
Yes.
Mention number 3, mention disability 3 ways, all different.
Yep.
I guess I'm wondering why that needs to be a hardbound rule. Is there not something to be gained by not making it, by just kind of accepting it as a normal kind of part of life that some people have,
Yeah,
physical or cognitive
I
differences?
think, I think the idea of, and this is like I said, she did it on her own. I said the 3 different ways I think that she did was to stop people from saying, oh, I see you're having trouble walking today, because it tends to get caught in dialogue, is the way people talk about disability, at least within narrative fiction. It ends up in the dialogue rather than being in the description or in some of the background activities in the way a character operates. A great example, in a fantasy sword and sorcery type thing, you've got the guy, and he's got his sword and is a fighter. That character loses their hand. And what the writer then focuses on is how that guy cannot fight. And I'm like, let me be honest, for most people who have a traumatic injury, the first thing's not how can I fight, it's going to be holy crap, how do I get dressed in the morning? How do I feed myself? Because they don't have that understanding. And I think what she was trying to do is get people past that hump. I'd agree, I don't think it needs to be as big a deal, but I think that it was an exercise, was why she wanted to do it. So, and to keep us from making it just about the talking. So, but 2 months, 0 people took her up on it. So.
Sorry, can I just interject with another question?
Sure.
Unless you wanted to move on. Did you have any characters in your submissions who were disabled and also occupied another category of
Yes, that's why the numbers don't quite match.
Okay.
So yes, we had several that occupied more than one. I know for sure the LGBT character was also a woman and had a disability. So I know that that's one that crossed multiple. So that makes the numbers even lower diversity-wise if you think about it.
And I was wondering to what extent these rules sort of reinscribe a white version of disability, or make disability.
The examples here?
The rules on the previous slide.
Okay, yeah, those were what she created as the challenge. It could be, because you're talking about just recreating it. It's the idea of people saying, write a character and then make it a woman, because it doesn't take into account the different perspectives someone has. So I would say, yeah, I can see the problems with that. And this is where you'll also hear from me my argument that there's the one Ari and I have, is that I would rather take any representation, because there's so little, that I will even accept a poor representation versus none at all, if that makes sense. And then at some point in the future, if we're ready to change over, great, and we start seeing better ones. But right now, with so little, I'd rather demand more, if that makes sense. And previously I lobbied for the American Psychological Association, and ages ago I read a great study, and it was actually about juries. And there's always that story of, if you have an all-white jury and you put one black person on it, it's going to be better because that one black person will address the minority perspective, and that's true, but not the way you think it is. What it is you put that person on there, all of the jury starts looking at other perspectives, thinking more broadly, and really examining and questioning the evidence. So what they found was, if you added that one person to add that diversity, in the end you got a much more thoughtful jury. You got a better jury. And so mine was, if I even add one disability character, even if it's a crappy one, what'll happen is all the other folks will start thinking about it. And that means if you're at least more thoughtful, that's one step forward. So based on that premise is where you'll get my hard stuff, but I will take it any way I can. But I think it's a valid argument insofar as when we look at the way disability is defined currently, it tends to not address some of the cultural competence issues, the way different cultures look at disability and the way they address it, where there's more, we have that independence model, there's more of an interdependence model that comes across much more strongly. So yes, I would concur that there are some issues with this. As an initial challenge, I'm like, I'll take it and run with it as far as we can. And obviously with 0 response, it's one of those things that's a little distressing, so.
So,
Hmm?
to add on to this disability challenge, I just recognize you could actually, right now, you have it as a challenge, but you can almost turn it into a litmus test or the disability version of the Bechdel test, where it's sort of like just a simple test to determine, like, if a character or, if a story actually, has any notion of passing, like, oh, it actually has disability going on in there. Even if it's, as you say,
Right, not
know,
necessarily the best. I have to admit, I'm like, oh, I'm fascinated with that idea. I don't know how it would work for characters that are not identified as having a disability, which in television we see a lot of characters who are not officially labeled as such. And I don't know if the 3 ways that, unless it's just 3 ways different. Okay, now you've got me really thinking. So when it comes to that later evening session where we talk about ways to take action, we're coming back to that.
and actually, my talk on positive portrayals in webcomics, it has a lot of interesting just parallels with this.
Perfect. Good. Then I can expect you for that talk later, yes?
I'll try to stay awake.
There we go.
I've got a quick question.
Mhm.
So what kind of genre stories are you talking about?
When I'm talking genre, I tend to talk speculative fiction. So what that means is science fiction, fantasy like sword and sorcery, and mystery as well. All of those tend to fall under genre.
Okay, I went to your presentation, so before.
Okay, so awesome. So I wanted to put a little bit of the who, what, when, and where, or who, what, and where that I've talked to people about this, and what some of the thoughts have been on that. So you're going to see more of them along the East Coast because that tends to be where I live. So there's that, and then I am a big supporter of Geek Girl Con in Seattle, and actually I intended to put that first because that you're going to hear that later when I talk about things that we can do. Last year I actually proposed a panel on the idea of disability in popular culture. And I wanted to talk about comics, I wanted to talk about film, I wanted to talk about television, and so basically actually I kind of talked to them because the year before they had a diversity panel that did not include disability at all. So they talked about LGBT characters, they talked about race and ethnicity, and they stopped there. And so I went after and said, can we do that? And basically asked Lawrence Carter Long, who was one of the hosts for Turner Classic Movies Disability in Film this last fall, Gail Simone, who wrote Birds of Prey for DC and currently writes Batgirl, and will soon be writing Red Sonja, so, and is well known in that field. Teal Scherer, who was an actress on the web television series The Guild. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that. It's more of a gaming-based one. She also more recently started her own web series called My Gimpy Life, which is based on being an actress who's a wheelchair user and what it takes to kind of make it in Hollywood. And the last was Liz Henry to talk about how disability crosses multiple social justice arenas. And what was great was be able to take from what had happened the year before and bring it forward and say, all right, in all these areas, why are we not seeing more disability? And this is a convention that has regular creators, I love it, regular, has non-disabled creators, is not generally focused on that and be able to take it to them. And what was great was the response. A lot of people were like, I didn't think about this. I think this is important. I should include more characters. I mean, it was overwhelmingly positive. If you hear from me, I'm a big supporter of community supporting communities. So that's what it should be about. And I was actually very proud this year. A lovely young trans woman came to me and said, I loved your panel. I felt a part of it. I have a disability. This year, I'm building a panel about trans characters in comics. I'm like, fantastic. That's what it should be about. And that's kind of what these are. Balticon is a science fiction convention. They bring in a lot of the NASA scientists, but they also have a lot of authors. So the rest of them going down that list all do that. And so basically every time I'm there I go, so we're going to have a panel on diversity. So we're going to include disability, aren't we? They don't always take it up, but if I'm in that audience, I'm going to raise my hand and ask the question. So, and so what I've done is really start hitting up a lot of the creators and asking, why are you not doing this? So, and this is what I got in response. So I kind of tried to break it down into what I was really hearing back from people. And the strongest one really is not relevant to the story. and that's what you'll hear. And in some ways, I can tell you, as far as short story writers, that's what they're taught. If you include something in there, you have to have a reason why. So, and so a lot of them say, well, the disability is not relevant to the story, so I'm not going to include it. Which also tells us why a lot of times when we see disability in stories, it tends to be all about the disability, or it tends to be an after-school special, because that's what people are learning to do. And so when it comes to, I guess, educating and working with authors or encouraging people, maybe the first thing is to talk to them about, you can have disability in there just as well as you can have race or ethnicity, and have it only, I don't want to say it won't impact it at all, because your story's about whatever the story is, whether it's about a murder mystery or about betrayal on a space station, you can still have your story. It doesn't make a difference to have a character with a disability. And I don't want to belittle that, because earlier we were talking about the slightly different perspectives, and that diversity, I think, adds a richness to the story. But at least as so far as talking to them in that initial phase, my big thing is there's no reason you can't include that. I give an example of a story that I wrote that's in a historical period. I have a character who's hard of hearing. The story's about slavery, has nothing to do with the hearing loss, but the character had it. And what was interesting, and this is where I mentioned earlier that 2 weeks of angst with the writing group, was 2 weeks of a battle, because they said, why did you include that hearing loss? It has nothing to do with your story at all. You should take that out. Why did you bother to do that? I'd written a story previously where the main character was Latino. Why did you do that? Why didn't you just write it as a regular guy? And that's what the response has been. So not relevant to the story, you shouldn't include it. And that in some ways is the battle that we're up against. And I put that first because that's what you're going to hear more than anything else. Number 2 is damned if you do and damned if you don't. And that came from Justine Larbalestier. She's a young adult author out of Australia. One of the things that she talked about from a lot of authors are those who have tried have gotten burnt. They've gotten yelled at for poor representations, for not knowing what they're talking about, for how horrible it is, the ongoing criticism. And so a lot of them have said, I will never do that again. And it's not just about disability, but about other kinds of differences as well. But in particular, I think disability is the one that has come up over and over. And so they tend to have the very hands-off. If you run a search online about writing characters with disabilities, you will find tons of pages put up by people with disabilities or by authors who've written who are saying, these are the rules of what you need to do. These are the things you should and shouldn't say. And let me just say, speaking as an author, even though I have a disability, you look at those rules, it's kind of terrifying. And I'm like, all right, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to deal with all that extra stuff. And so they tend to walk away. Because it sounds like there are going to be people angry at them if they get it wrong. And so that'll be the second hardest thing to get over. But it has come up, and she talked about it in her stories and what some of the tough criticism that she's received. And this is where I go and I'll be honest, a lot of times, yes, there are some horrible things people write about people with disabilities that is completely not based in reality. And I'm like, really? And at the moment I cannot think of any good examples, but I'm sure many of you have read them.
Well, if I could mention, actually I wanted to pass to Suzanne, because you talked about the fan fiction.
Yeah.
Is that resonating with what you're talking
Yeah, no, it's definitely, my presentation was on fan fiction of Hawkeye in the comics and how fans bring back his deafness and how some of these interpretations are really, really great and really nice to see, and then others are just...
I'm sorry, I can't
If you said the
hear.
ratio
Could you
was
speak
28.
up?
Yeah,
Oh,
I couldn't hear either. Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
We couldn't hear.
Actually, do we
There's
have another
let's do
mic
it.
that we can just pass around? That way, I love when everybody gets to talk, so I think it's much more meaningful.
okay, sorry. My presentation was on Hawkeye and fan fictions that brought back his deafness after it had been erased in the comics. And some of them were really, really good and did it really well, and then others just did not at all. And I think at the end of the day, the fact that they're bringing it back and the fact that they're creating a conversation around it sort of trumps the fact that there is all this really problematic stuff that's being written, because you still have people commenting on the comments and saying, you did this, not even that you did this wrong, but this is not something that I, as a deaf person or as a hard of hearing person, relate to at all, and this is not accurate portrayal, and authors will respond to that or not respond to that. but it does sort of create a dialogue and create a conversation. So even the problematic, if the author is open to criticism, even the problematic stuff sort of has a positive spin on it.
Exactly, and so part of it's, making sure you are informative and educational without going on a huge rant against some of the authors, but that is one of the things. People are doing it, and actually fanfic is a great place where you can see some people who've retained disability in a lot of the characters, particularly the comic ones. So I'm like, yes! The third one was accusations of tokenism, and it kind of relates to number one insofar as well, I'm just going to toss them in there, just like having the black sidekick is kind of the in thing now, or having the woman as the sidekick. Is the in thing, and so they don't want, I'm like, I don't want to do that. If I'm going to put them in there, I want it to be meaningful. And well, what's stopping you? It would be kind of my response to that. But you will hear that. They go, they don't want it to be just there. And a small part of me is like, no, put it in. I would rather take a token. I would rather have, in a comic book, I'd rather see a little character in a wheelchair in the background, showing that it's a real world, 20%, than not have that at all. So that's kind of my little fuss with that. So, all right. And then the last one was inclusiveness is there.
Dave, can I throw out one more thing on
Yep.
because I think it's interesting what you said about them saying, well, I want it to be meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times when writers and producers of media and culture say that they want a meaningful narrative about disability, what they're actually saying is they want a public service announcement,
Oh.
or very special episode syndrome or what have you. And that's a problem all in and of itself.
Right.
As disabled people, we don't go around, making the lives of those around us, just so very special on a constant basis. We got stuff to do, so,
We guessed, right, and that's exactly how it relates to that item number one, which is not relevant to the story. The idea is it has to be relevant and meaningful, and that's where you get your very special episodes. And the last one was inclusiveness is in there. I'm like, I've got a black person, and a brown person, and a woman person, and a gay person. I care about people, not traits. And a small part of me goes, you know what? This sounds so bad. I'm like, that's a cheap sidestep. I'm sorry. They go, I care about the person, not the trait. Then what happens is people write, you're going to write to the default. The default is a white, straight male. And we can pretend as much as we'd like, no, people will read what they want to. That's not true. And the best example we have from that is the controversy around the Hunger Games. She wrote that book. It's very clear in there that those characters are characters of color. She didn't make a huge deal about it, but it is in the text. And yet, man, the internet screeds all about that, about people saying, no, how horrible that in the film they made the little girl black. And I'm like, it's in the story. That's the way it is. And so part of it is really pushing people to actually put it, I guess, not sidestep with that excuse that it's about people. Because if it's about people, it should be about all people, and that needs to be something that's a little clearer.
Why was it horrible to make the little girl black? I'm just curious. I'm like, not that I know of, I think they figured it was, why are you changing the story? The author intended it this way. It's just political correctness. That's why you're doing it. Which I guess relates to that tokenism issue. And I'm like, no, it's in the book. But I'll be honest, I didn't really empathize very well with the folks who were that angry about it, so I can't say I understand and can speak to what exactly they're feeling. And I know that makes it hard to address an issue when you don't fully understand it. But there, Google it. It's ugly. It is ugly, and some of the name calling, and it from there very quickly moved into misogyny. So you have the racism and you have the misogyny, and it's bad, and the sexism, ugly.
Another question or comment?
Sure.
I was going to say, I was talking to Allison in the last group about Family Guy with the character that had Down syndrome,
Mhm.
and that's a kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. He portrayed her naturally and as a bit of a bitch, and they're
Right.
like, you can't do that to someone who has Down syndrome, and he's like, well, they can be bitches too. And Seth MacFarlane was arguing that, and because he was realistic, he got slammed by everyone.
He got hit pretty hard. I'm hoping that there were people who are willing to step up and say, you know what, no, because the main
Pardon?
The actress did.
She did, she actually has Down syndrome, and the main point of that episode, if you think about it, is the one line, people with Down syndrome are can be mean, just like anybody else. I'm like, wow. And it is rough, and that is a damned if you do, damned if you don't. If it wasn't Seth MacFarlane, if it wasn't somebody who already had that status, if it was a writer just getting started, do you think they're ever going to do another character with a disability?
Right, and in the case of Seth MacFarlane, he kind of wanted that reaction.
Right, I mean,
So he was asking
he's
for
gonna,
it.
yeah, he's gonna push for it anyway, but that's one of the things that becomes really tough when we're pushing for that greater inclusivity, to make sure we're actually coming across in a way that encourages people to put more characters in. What I pulled here is like, and I'll be honest, I lost my slides, so I was trying to put some together, and they came in at 3 o'clock this morning. And so I actually pulled, these are direct quotes from a lovely, very upfront guy who runs his own gaming shop. This is where I don't remember the details, and I'm actually, if somebody could read that, that would be fantastic out loud, because.
I'll do that.
Oh, thank you.
I created a very male-dominated game because I am cowardly. The sex divide at this point is 10 male characters to 3 females. I took what I felt was somewhat of a risk, having a female in the main cast of characters. The second bullet says, so for me, striving for game content diversity is a case of being once bitten and twice shy. I've hired both women and people of color to work with me at Untold Entertainment, but I've always been terrified of saying the wrong thing around them. I'm altogether too nervous to write a female or a person of color in one of my games, for fear of the Anita Sarkeesians and the drama and English teachers of the world calling me out for inappropriate chest size or for perpetuating harmful stereotypes. And on the flip side, I worry that I'll catch flack for continually writing games with only white male protagonists.
So he's making a couple of references there. Anita Sarkeesian actually put forward a Kickstarter to do, it was tropes versus women, and she wanted to examine a variety of video games and showing how, rather than real women, you've got these weird stereotypes and stand-ins for women. And so basically she's putting forward a series of videos that actually really examines those. And one of his things is, I get what she's doing and I can object to it civilly. And he goes, my objection is, there are all sorts of tropes and stereotypes, and it's very hard not to be able to put one of those in, especially when you're trying to draw broad brush things. And all it does is create greater fear. He's very open about being a victim of being able to put that forward, and then having someone jump on him for the way he's portrayed women. The example of his English teacher was when he was 14 and he was doing drawing, and he drew I think it was a female superhero, and the boobs weren't quite right. And the teacher kind of yelled at him about it, so he's hadn't drawn since.
Question here, it's interesting. In video games, the people will often refuse to publish their video games because of the characters. One company will get a proposal and they'll all refuse to publish it because of the characters. So they want them published, but it means, another male character, so it's just not fair.
Right, and that's the tough part, is that's the fear right there that we're fighting. And this example is specific to video games, but I've heard similar things from authors, I've heard it from producers, I've heard it from other artists, and they're leery of doing that. And so I'm like, this is what we're fighting against. And I actually am really glad that he was able to actually put that forward in there. As he says, I'm a coward, and that's rough. So. When I wanted to do problems with disability fiction, I talked about the responses that I was getting from the authors. And this is where, in some ways, I go, the responses from them tend to show up in these areas here. And I think Ari kind of hit on some of those. So, and the big one, first one was like all about the disability. So it has to be the reason for the character's existence. You can't have a character with a disability unless it's about disability. The second was the after-school special and the important lesson for the hero to learn. The third one is the stereotypes, the psychic blind people, the happy people with intellectual disabilities, the bitter cripples and the inspirational overachievers. And let me say, I've been accused of the last one, actually. And the last one is the inclusion competition. And this is kind of a little bit where that tokenism is. The text is actually, I'll see your black Jewish lesbian and I'll raise you my transgender Chinese exchange student. So, and those are some of the things that that at least we're seeing in some of the science fiction and the fantasy arenas is what people are doing with that. So. I wanted to give an example of some of these, and like I said, I lost my slides, so I made a few of them. So the after-school special, the important lesson for the here to learn. For those who may loathe it, I give you glee. And this is Quinn Fabray's character. She was texting while driving. Oh no, she was in a car accident, and now she uses a wheelchair. And granted, they have a regular character with a disability, but this is a very clear example of the after-school special, which bugs me a lot. The other one was the stereotypes, and this is where Mr. Johnson here, and I can't remember which one it is. Basically, don't be a Bond villain, because if you're a Bond villain, you have a disability.
And let die.
Yes, thank you. It is. And so, if you think about all the James Bond films, I think almost every one, the villain has had a disability. And so that's another kind of ongoing stereotype. So, victim, villain. So, and then before we get too discouraged, I had to, so Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones. It's not quite as a direct carryover from what George R.R. Martin had put in his story, where he added a lot of other things about ugly and the way the character is, but as far as having a character and an actor with a disability playing a very visible role, and in some ways you could say actually a very beloved role, because he's very popular even outside of the disability community as a character. It's like, look, that's a positive first step. There's a character, and they're like, now the question is, can we do it again? And can we spread that a little bit further? And so I just wanted to put that in there. So I also wanted to add a few other things. So I put out my call for submissions. You know, I got my 450 submissions, and I got my 5 characters with disabilities. And that's me personally. I have a disability, so I'm going to want that diversity. So the question, I started looking, who else is doing that? And what was really distressing is there are hundreds of online magazines and submissions and places like, and so just out of a general search of trying to see what I could find in the arenas that I write in, which are, like I said, that's that speculative fiction arena. I was looking for magazines that actually had a statement where they said, I want to have diversity. I want to have a diversity of characters, you know, whether that's race, religion, disability. I was specifically kind of looking for disability, but I would have taken anything to see if people were actually asking for it. And what was really disappointing, I think I found three major magazine publishers who played professional rates who were doing that. This one is actually the cover from Cross Genres magazine, who I'm like huge fans of, and this is their Ancient Artifacts anthology, which I think is coming out this summer. And I actually talked to the editors of it, and they said we told the artists what we wanted to have diversity. They have it on their main page, and if you look at it, it's a young girl of color, and if you look down, she has an artificial leg. There's no big deal made out of it, there's no fuss, they just released it as the cover, and I'm like, you know what, that's kind of awesome. And this is their statement that they have on their website openly about I lose my brain, for submissions, and I don't remember the exact language, but basically they encourage submissions with underrepresented characters, and they actually list out some of the things they want. They want LGBTQ characters, they want characters with disabilities, and women, and they've actually put that in there. The other two that I found said they want diverse characters, but they did not go into detail as to what they're looking at. Well, one of them didn't, and the other one talked about race, ethnicity, and LGBT, no disability. So, but I'm like, I'm hopeful. That is one that is pushed for that, and like I said, so my little thing is as I go to those conventions to start raising my hand going, what is your policy on diversity? Can we see more characters with disabilities? And just encourage them to do that. And I couldn't resist. So these are the last 10 years of the Hugo Award winners. And I was looking for, all right, is there anything in there that has to do with disability? And we've got several real pretty book covers. I think the closest one is Rainbow's End, where we have it's a science fiction novel. We have a character who's recovering from Alzheimer's. That's it. In the 10 years worth of nebulas, which are, I think, voted on by members of the Science Fiction Society. We have one, I want to say that was 2006, which was The Speed of Dark, which was Elizabeth Moon, and the main character has autism. So I'm about 50-50 on the novel. I lean towards it as being pretty good, but I'd want to hear from somebody who actually has autism whether she actually captured the character well. So, but it's just an example of how little there is. So, next step is, like I said, I'm going there, I'm pushing them. So, do you have people with disabilities in your story? The answer is yes. Good job. Consider adding more people with disabilities. Do you have people with disabilities in your story? No? Add some. And so basically, that's kind of been the general message to some of the writers out there. And it's hard, but the idea is to take our message beyond the disability borders. You know, we're fans. You know, we're fans first, right? So the idea is when you go to that Star Trek convention, start asking about it. You know, when people write fanfic that covers disability really well, let them know. Say, this is awesome, I love the way you handle it, and encourage people to write more. I know at least 2 fanfic writers who've gone on to actual writing careers. The one that most immediately comes to mind is Naomi Novik with His Majesty's Dragons, where she redid the Napoleonic Wars with dragons. So the idea is when you talk to people, you're actually improving our chances of getting what we want out of this. And so that is kind of it. And that's what I've got.
We have about 10 minutes for questions.
Perfect timing!
You're awesome.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the perspective of speculative fiction. I wanted to ask you because we were talking about fantasy science, and science fiction, and they were all like idealized. So, you know, to add this character with a disability. So what about, you know, in fantasy, how do we find a place because it's fantasy? So to add a character in fantasy can be perfect, but it's a fantasy. So like in science fiction, you can add a character, but it's more of a challenge, you know, like you have 2 options. You can have an idealized person in science fiction, like Star Trek, or you can have someone who's more
Dystopian, yes.
And then that's more of a challenge. You know, you can add a person with a disability there, but it's more of this dystopia. So how do you add someone with a disability into these 2 different?
You can. It's one of the things where you're hearing from the authors, and a lot of them get uneasy about it because they can't see how it can happen. But science fiction has a long history of being reflective of things of our time. Science fiction stories have talked about racism, they've talked about sexism. The idea is it's supposed to give us a chance to look at things in our society in a future time period. So it's still idealized, but the history of science fiction is as something that offers a cultural criticism. So in that respect, it should be addressing things, and disability is one of them. The biggest example where I don't see it, where it could come in and that bothers me, and I think this might be a better example to maybe answer your question, would be a lot of popularity now with military science fiction. So as an example, how many veterans have come back from Iraq and Afghanistan missing limbs with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, you know, and we've got amazing prosthetics and care now as compared to, you know, pre-Civil War, but we're still accommodating for that. So even in the future, if you have military science fiction, you've got battles in space, you're going to have people who are injured that you have to address, and I always tell people their story has to be real within the rules of that world. So even in a science fiction idealized future, you can't magically make people whole, or so it's going to be a very poor story. The same goes for fantasy. If most fantasies tend to reflect that medieval type world. So if you have people with swords instead of guns, you know, when it used to be, I do fencing, and one of the things that you'll see nowadays is a modern pistol grip handle. The pistol grip handle on the swords came from old fencing masters who had lost fingers from sword battles. So if you've got old fighters in that kind of time period, they're going to be missing some fingers. You know, there are other things related to that people would live through. Pox scars all over people's faces because we don't have the medicine. So a part of me goes, the authors don't know how to put it in, or they aren't thinking about it. They've set up real rules for their world, and there are ways to put disability in there and meet the rules.
Or, for example, they just don't think about the problem.
Yep. Yes. Yes.
So,
Military science fiction guys are so guilty of it.
You know, how do you expect them to write about it if they don't think about it?
Ask them. I mean, ask them. That's
the root of the problem.
right.
You have to get to the root of the problem and expose them to that, and then they'll understand it, and then they can write about it.
Right, and that's part of the reason why I'm saying go to these other conventions. The last weekend I was on a panel with a bunch of military science fiction writers, and we were talking about how to deal with a war in space, and we were talking about logistics. And I poked at them really hard, saying, you know, when you talk about winning a war, it's not just about who has the bigger ships and the bigger army. It's also about logistics. Who has the better, what is your political and economic background that's going to cover that? What is your care for your folks coming back, because you want to get these guys healed to get them back on the front lines as quickly as possible. And so the idea was to put forward to them, you guys are not thinking about how many guys come back. You know, and I love the fact that you talk to any veteran, they don't have a disability, they're busted up, who come back busted up from wars, and then basically need accommodations. So, but yeah, honestly, ask, tell them to do it. I have a great example. I talked earlier about the fact that Greyhaven Comics is putting out a story of mine, a comic this summer. They'd heard about the shootings in Newtown, and they said, we want to put out something that addresses some of the bullying in schools. That wasn't the true story of what happened there, but we want to address it. We want to address it from race. We want to address what happens to young girls. And so I sent a note saying, you know, I write science fiction and fantasy. You know, I do comic work as well. But you know what? You haven't talked about disability. I would love to see disability addressed in this. I got a note back saying, you know what? You're absolutely right. Send us something. So this summer, as a part of that comic, they're going to have disability in there. And all I did was send an email and ask. It's not always that easy, though.
Is this on? I really want to dispute the idea that we shouldn't criticize people.
Go for it.
Because I think that, you know, this whole idea that, oh, creators live in fear. I don't care. Like, I'm sorry your feelings got hurt. Maybe you should be more sensitive. I'm just really, I've had it with this argument that we should not criticize things that are problematic because people are trying. I think there are ways to criticize constructively rather than destructively.
I think that's where we actually agree, is the idea of criticize constructively versus destructively. And I think I'm also tender because I've seen the destructive side of things a little too much, and so I tend to really lean on the other side. But I'm also to say each of you is different in how you choose to address it, where your end lines are of how you feel and how you choose to express it. The same goes, they used to say, if you aren't seeing enough women in comics, you should write your own. And frankly, I find that answer insulting, because not everybody wants to write their own comic. So I think part of it's figuring out where you are, what you're comfortable saying, and doing that. So, you know, we all want the same thing. We want more disability, and I have this. We want our fiction and our popular culture and media to reflect us. I love the way Ari put it. We want to have that mirror so it shows us there. And the idea is how exact that mirror is, how accurate it is, and our willingness to tolerate that, that's going to vary from person to person. But as long as we're willing to speak up and to go after that so we actually see positive change, I think is the key point that I really want to push.
I kind of wanted to bring you back to the war scenario once. I was wondering what your thoughts on The Walking Dead with, now we've had 2 amputees.
Believe it or not, I don't have cable, so I have not seen The Walking Dead.
See their portrayal.
I actually am interested.
I've heard, how about this, I've heard some good things from friends, but they actually love the comic and they love the show, so I don't know how critical they're being, so, but they think it's great.
Yeah, I had another couple of, I guess, comments, and I'm not that well versed in American science fiction, but it seems to me that there's maybe two kind of issues that might crop up, and maybe you sort of touched on them. Is there not, I guess, in a lot of these futuristic narratives, a kind of quasi-eugenicist kind of impulse, maybe which you've encountered in these military sci-fi things? I'm thinking of something like Avatar, where on the one hand, we have a main character in a wheelchair, but by the end of the story, sorry to spoil it, he's given up that imperfect or flawed body that he doesn't want to live with anymore, and he's become this other body, this alien body that's superior in every way. So there's a kind of impulse towards this self-perception. That's one thing. The other thing, it seems to me, is something that Mark Singer at Harvard University has written about regarding Legion of Superheroes, which is the futuristic superhero series that kind of takes issues of race, he's mainly talking about race, but kind of shoehorns them or kind of talks around them by just having these physical others, or these others be aliens. They're whatever, they're different species. And again, any kind of real, the main characters tend to be pretty much all white, Anglo. Whereas these others, there is physical difference, but it's always being characterized as first and foremost being a different species or an other in some other way. And it just seems to me this, is there maybe something about the genre that has, I don't want to call it limitations, but the way that it's usually been used is
I
in
would
that
call it a
direction.
cheap sidestep. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say. Who writes most science fiction? If you still look at it, they tend to be men, over 40, I'd actually probably say over 50 for many of the ones that I know, and they tend to be all white, and so they tend to write themselves. And so we do see alien culture sometimes as a stand-in, but a lot of times I think it falls under the nobody has pushed them and said you should address race in here. Look at, and like you said, all their main characters, at least the human ones, are Anglo, and I'm like, there's no reason for that, other than like I said, it's cheap. And obviously, I'm kind of unforgiving on that point, and different people may say that's legitimate, but I'm like,
Well, no, he's discussing race, but I guess
Right.
I'm trying to say, you know, if you shift it over to disability, then I think it becomes, I'm not really defending it, obviously.
right, yeah, and
That's
so right,
where
what
some
he
of this
does,
fear is coming from too.
right, and what he does for race, I think people do for disabilities too, and I'm like, nope, not allowed. Well, I mean, it's allowed. I'm like, I don't approve. There, my disapproval is so powerful that you will change your ways. But definitely, and the eugenics argument I think is an interesting one. I don't see it. How about this? I don't see it written into the story. It may be in the backstory of the world, but if it's not mentioned there, then what do we assume? You know, is it not there? And I don't want to put something into a story that's not there. But it would be an interesting thought. But it doesn't change the trauma-induced disability aspect. So, at least as far as some of the military science fiction.
So I had a comment. One of my favorite, as a big fan, genres of science fiction is apocalyptic, dystopian science fiction. And I think a great example, and I'm not sure if you've read it, The Stand by Stephen King. The Stand is proof that people, you know, if there's a plague, there are going to be people with disabilities who survive, there's going to be deaf people who survive, there's going to be women, there's going to be people addicted to drugs, etc., etc. What do you think of that? Because it's not a great representation, but they're there.
But remember, I'm the one who errs on the side of having it there. So for me, actually, I think that would be great. The idea is that our world is big and diverse, and there's a mix of people with and without disabilities, different races, men, women. And so if you're going to have a plague that's going to wipe a bunch of people out, what's left should probably be about that same, well, I don't say about that same, but it should also be diverse. And so that's kind of one of the things. Yeah, it's kind of like horror movies. You don't want to be the black guy running through the woods. You will die. You don't want to be the girl who's having sex. You will die.
Yes.
You know.
My second question, or I guess thought, does this carry over for you for films? Because I'm thinking in terms of sci-fi, there's things like Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow. We have Frankie who has an eye patch. We have the movie Sucker Punch, which the main character, we get our entire narrative through a person with disabilities. So do you think it's less problematic in film, equally problematic?
Oh.
Can you name a good movie with a major character with a disability where it is not about the disability, and it doesn't mean one of those other stereotyped like cure us kind of a things. I'm like, it's really hard, and most disability films tend to be either about it or a little more documentarian, and so I actually tend to be a lot uglier in some ways about film because I see less of it there, and I think Avatar is a good example of that. It's just a very short time, and he's cured. Yay, isn't this great? I'm like, the world doesn't work that way. People don't necessarily work that way, and that's kind of one of my grumpy Gus moments. So,
One
Green
film-
Lantern.
I'll give you one film, and I don't know if anyone's seen it. Wrist Cutters: A Love Story.
No.
It is about the afterlife of an entire society of people who have killed themselves. That's the plot. What is the afterlife like? And it's a comedy, and it's a sci-fi, and it's a romance. So, and it's not about their mental illnesses. It's about they're dealing with the consequences, trying to relive a life where they still have the depression, they still have the anxiety, and other issues that led them to kill themselves. But now they're in a whole community of people who have also killed themselves, so they're dealing with it together as a group. And I don't know if anyone here has seen it, but it's really good, and it's on Netflix, and it's kind of indie, but it's cool.
Gonna have a screening.
It's wonderful, I love it.
Excellent.
But that's all I can think of.
No,
And Sucker Punch, maybe.
Oh, I heard that was a terrible movie.
Really?
That's what I heard. I haven't seen it, so I can't vouch for that, but that's what I heard.
So it's 5:35, and I see there are a few more questions we have, so why don't we just take maybe one or two quick more questions, and then we'll wrap up and we'll move to the next part. Yes?
I was just going to ask about the insurgence recently of the freak show movement. And we see the freak show on AMC, but I was also thinking of the wonderful short-lived HBO series that involved a freak show, which was, Carnival, which was an excellent portrayal of different disabilities. And of course, most people, you were mentioning about books that won. One book, it's a little old now, but that won a number of awards was Geek Love, which, if you can get through it. Yeah, well, it's speculative, kind of. I mean,
Kind of.
Yeah.
It might be closer to what, to me, a little more like magical realism, a
Yeah.
little more literary.
yeah.
Sort of, there's no any specific fantasy elements to it, but
Well, I mean, there's kind of this whole how the geeks are made. I mean, they create their own geekdom by, using all kinds of material to create a mutant race, kind of.
yeah, that's riffing up the thalidomide baby kind of
Yeah.
thing. It's riffing off of the thalidomide baby thing that happened in the 60s, using drugs to create. Yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to add on to the film comment. In terms of, in my experience, I found that a lot of when you're looking at adaptations, film adaptations of books or comics, even when you have a disability, it gets lost when it's translated onto the screen. I'm thinking very specifically of hearing loss with Hawkeye as the example I've been using all day, but also in the Hunger Games, in the during the games, there's an explosion and Katniss is deaf in one ear and she loses all of her hearing because she's close to the explosion, and that features into the rest of that story arc. And again, in the book itself, it's magically restored, so that itself has its own problematic factors, but it is a disability that exists. And then you get the film, and there's none of that. You don't get a thing. So there's a lot of, I would agree that I think film is way worse.
So next year, can we promote a session that talks about film and disability?
Rachel, do you want to say something about that really fast? If not, I can. Well, we do have some content on film, but we certainly would like to have more.
Woohoo!
So everyone who's been making these comments, we will look forward to your proposals for CripCon 2014, for which we've already received funded to have a 2-day symposium, actually, next year.
Yay!
So,
Great work, you guys.
round of applause and warm, happy expressions of appreciation for Day Al-Mohamed. Thank you,
All right,
everybody.
thank you guys. I did not get a chance to put my email up there, but if anybody does want to continue this discussion, which I would love to do, I can be reached at daysmail@gmail.com. daysmail@gmail. It's a lot easier than my last name. So, all right, thank you guys. You've been fantastic.